higher dimensional reality that impinges on our 3D world. And there was a great article in New Scientist a couple of weeks ago about this. Just like in your credit card, there's a hologram of a little bird or something.
Yes.
It's a 3D image embedded on a two-dimensional surface, right? But it can look kind of 3D, but your credit card is really kind of technically like a two-dimensional surface. The hologram is just a flat thing, but it projects 3D. Well, in the same way, in our 3D world, fourth-dimensional processes impinge onto our 3D surface. If we're living in Flatland and we're on that credit card, we wouldn't know what was going on outside the credit card, these people using the credit card. We would just live on that card, and occasionally we would get stuck into a cash machine or something, or a credit card reader. We wouldn't know what that was because we lived on the surface of the two-dimensional surface.
Yeah.
Well, in the same way, in our 3D world, there are things that happen that we can't explain. Just like the inhabitants of a two-dimensional world can't explain it when something comes down from above. There's no concept of above and below in a two-dimensional world. And in a three-dimensional world, there's no concept of really anything but the present. And so that's what Flatland, was written like in 1884 or something. And Edwin Abbott, it was a great idea, because the whole point of the book is, it's really funny, is that the guy gets arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment because he believes in higher dimensions.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a comment on Victorian England. He gets visited by a sphere, and they say they know these things exist, the elite of Flatland, but they don't want anybody to know because it would disturb the social order. So they try him, and they all know it's real, but they said, we can't let the public know. This is in 1884. And so we all kind of live in this we know there's more than our conventional science or media or officials in our society say is true. But they don't want it to be true because it disturbs the status quo too much. And yet we're having these experiences just like the inhabitants of Flatland experienced spheres. We're experiencing things like what? UFOs, apparitions, ghosts. Oh, just you name it. This is all explainable from a 4D, 5D level impinging on a 3D surface. If you think about it that way, it's not so outlandish that way at all, that things could just pop in and pop out. But from a 3D perspective, it is. Anyway, that's what Flatland's all about, and it's certainly it's worth reading, because even now you read it and it's so funny. Or take a look at the movie.
Actually, I was told to look at the movie just a little while ago. Reading your book, I love that it was mentioned there. It's like, okay, it's time for me to see that.
I have a post about it on my blog from a couple days ago.
What's the URL?
It's crystalbluemind.com.
Fabulous.
And I have a post going 2 or 3 days back, Flatlander, you can just search for it. And there's a link through to it. It was featured in Spiritual Cinema Circle a couple months ago.
Okay.
And as one of their featured films, they have 4 every month.
Right.
And I wrote a little thing about it, because that's how I found out about it. Is I didn't, it wasn't in my movie theaters. It's also, you can see clips on YouTube, and you can go to their website, the flatlandthemovie.com. No, it's a great movie, and the ideas are still really valuable and useful. And that's why I kind of, in Opening Minds, I kind of talked about it at the beginning. It's just a good metaphor for where we're at right now.
You make a distinction between remote viewing and resonant viewing. Why? And explain it to the public, please.
Well, it's actually a very important point, Kim, because if remote viewing works, it implies that there isn't anything that's really remote, right?
Correct.
Because it's remote from the sense of 3 dimensions, but if we can connect with distant objects, people, and events, and get information from them, or even communicate, like some experiments have attempted to do, then they're not really remote, are they? Otherwise, you wouldn't be communicating with them. So it really suggests that there's a type of resonant connection, like we were talking about, in the beginning of the show, like radio waves, radio frequencies, and you're selecting the channel you want to perceive on. It's more that everything's connected all the time. You're just choosing which channels you choose to perceive in a variety of ways. So remote viewing was a cool term they came up with to get funding for it back when they were getting the interest of the intelligence and military communities.
Yes.
But I don't think scientifically it's the most accurate way to describe it, because it's coming from a 3D perspective. The whole idea of remoteness is a 3D idea. It's a mechanistic idea.
Let's talk about something in remote viewing. You train people to go in and bypass space and time to access people, events, situations that have been in the past, are happening in the present, or will happen in what we understand to be our future. What happens when this portal opens up in your students and now they can access, could I say, other universes of phenomenon, other parallel paths of phenomenon? What happens to students who now have this portal open, and how do you distinguish remote viewing from what people would say, oh, that's just being a psychic? That's just psychic phenomenon. I know I asked you two questions, but whichever
yes,
one
you
can.
Did
okay.
You?
Yeah, I did. Sorry about that.
To go answer the first one, let's go with the second one first. Remote viewers, quote unquote, distinguish themselves just from the whole concept of psychic in the sense that there's a structured system with a set of stages or phases, if you would like, that proceeds in a certain way when people are being trained. It's what the Stanford Research Institute and the military came up with for a way that was training anyone to be able to do this. And a psychic process is generally a little more unstructured, but I don't want to say that in a negative way. They're really all tapping into the same process. It's just the methodology is different. A psychic could go about accessing information in any untold number of ways, even ways they can't describe to us. A remote viewer has a way of describing it in a sense. It was designed for that because it was designed to be used within a government military system. So it's just a different methodology in my view, but the underlying processes in nature that make it possible are probably pretty much the same thing. There's also the issue of verifiability and so forth.
I was going to say that
remote viewers like to always point out how they do verifiable targets, but they don't always do this. People view all sorts of targets all the time that can't be verified until later or maybe not at all. But that's a good, important point, certainly in training, is to be able to verify that this is corresponding to the reality we can see in front of us if you're viewing this reality, right?
Isn't it the protocol that also distinguishes it? It's the series of protocols that distinguish.
Yes, there is feedback at the end of a resonant viewing, remote viewing session that allows the viewer to see exactly what they were viewing, right? So they can calibrate their system. And often psychics may not have that type of feedback available to them. If they're working with the police or other situations, maybe you don't ever get the feedback because a case may never be solved, whatever. So there's a variety of differences in the approach. The RV process is really designed to give feedback to the viewer so they learn as much as possible about themselves, when they're done.
Can't they get better? Is it like enhancing a muscle, if you will, like an exercise?
Yes. There is debate about this in the viewing community. Obviously, I wouldn't be someone that teaches this to people if I didn't believe they could relearn or remember how to do this. And I think it's a lot of different processes. It's learning to reduce the amount of noise in your mind so that the signal is just louder because there's less noise, less chatter. But the analogy of a muscle is pretty good. I mean, it's there. You just need to exercise it again. It's like a limb that fell asleep. So it's kind of partly built in, and it's partly you need to remember that it's there and get comfortable with the way that the information feels, because it doesn't feel the same as conscious information. So that is kind of a difference between psychic, the idea of a psychic and the idea of remote viewer. It's the methodology that's very different, even if the underlying processes still use the same sort of, whatever it is, quantum or etheric energies, whatever it is, it's a different methodology. But to go to your first question, you can access a lot, but you never access really more than you're ready for, because you're accessing more of yourself, in a sense, when you do viewing. And that is going to open up, the subconscious mind, in my view, is going to open up as it feels comfortable in doing. So technically, you could access everything and anything, but we all still live here, as embodied earth beings here with certain things that are important to us every day and things we need to pay attention to. So for many of us, we're never just going to be able to completely wander away from ourselves, because we all have responsibilities and things that we have to do here to keep going every day. And so you can take a little break from that for a while, but the portal does open up. It definitely does open up, and it opens up to people in very interesting ways. I can't tell you how many times I've given people that targets, the things that we view as practice, hidden in a folder, that just looked to me like a regular object that made them burst into tears or something, because it reminded them of something they hadn't thought about in a long time. In many cases, a UFO-related encounter that they forgot about that they had when they were a kid. Round objects often remind people of flying saucers, and people remember things that happened to them that they haven't remembered in a long time, or things that just felt scary, you know?